Wally Lamb is one of our most beloved novelists. His first two novels, She's Come Undone and I Know This Much Is True, were #1 New York Times bestsellers, New York Times Notable Books of the Year, and featured titles of Oprah's Book Club. Lamb is also the editor of the nonfiction anthologies Couldn't Keep It to Myself, Testimonies from Our Imprisoned Sisters, and All Fly Away, collections of autobiographical essays which evolved from a writing workshop he facilitates at Connecticut's York Correctional Institute, a maximum security prison for women. He has served as a Connecticut Department of Corrections volunteer since 1999. His fifth novel, We Are Water, was just released and debuted at #4 on the New York Times bestseller list. Library Journal praised the new novel, saying, "We are water, fluid, flexible when we have to be, but strong and destructive too." That's evident in this emotionally involving new novel. Clear and sweetly flowing, highly recommended. Appearing in conversation with Wally Lamb tonight is Jane Ganahl, co-founder and artistic director of the Litquake Festival here in San Francisco. So without further ado, please welcome Jane Ganahl and Wally Lamb to the stage.
Hey, Jane.
I'm sure all that applause is for me. Thank you so much. So, congratulations on the auspicious debut.
Thank you.
#4, is that correct?
Yes, that's what they tell me.
That's pretty amazing. And that's in week 1, or I mean, how do they determine that? Like, how do they know? Do they have to wait a few weeks of lag time since the release date, and then they know they add it up, or how does that work?
I'm not quite sure why it lags, because I did get this information. I can't remember what the date was, but it was the last World Series game.
Oh.
Whenever that was, I was in Boston, and I got the news just before the game started.
And of course, you're a Boston fan, since that's your closest team, right?
That's right.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm actually a Boston Red Sox fan. My wife, Chris, is a Boston Red Sox lunatic.
Oh, is that right? How lucky you are to have a lunatic baseball fan for a spouse. That's great. So, so just sort of starting at the beginning with She's Come Undone. She's Come Undone. That's easy for me to say. I think the thing that really impressed people was your ability to portray a woman sensitively, but also unsparingly as she continues to be tested sort of over and over again. Mm-hmm. And your new book, We Are Water, sort of takes on another troubled character. This time it's the outsider artist, Annie O, who's preparing to marry her lover, who happens to be a woman. What is it about troubled women, or not just troubled women, but both of these women are extraordinarily, at least to me, reading them, were very charismatic women, troubled, charismatic, and sort of powerful in their own way. And you know, what draws you to that kind of character?
Well, I think I would have to look back into my childhood for that. I grew up with two bossy older sisters and equally bossy girl cousins who lived next door. It was a very female-centric neighborhood. The only other boy on McKinley Avenue in Norwich, Connecticut was Vito Signorino.
Wow, he sounds dangerous.
He was. He used to throw rocks at me, and in the wintertime, snowballs. And on one memorable occasion, a rock inside of a snowball.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Anyway, so my mother decreed that I couldn't play with Vito, and it's like, who wanted to play with him? I just wanted to evade him. But that cast me in the role of the observer of my sisters and my cousins' wild and crazy games of pretend. You know, when you're an observer, that's not a bad thing to be as a kid when you know, you're going to grow up to be a fiction writer. I do remember one time when I was enlisted to be a part of their games of pretend. My sisters had found some old net curtains up in the attic, and so they decided they were going to play harem girls, and so I was cast as Kingy Boy, and all I had to do was sit cross-legged on the floor with a terry cloth towel wrapped around my head and say things like, "Peel me a grape," while my sisters and my cousins danced and undulated around me in this sort of, well, I was only 7. I didn't think of it as a provocative way, but they were closer to puberty. Anyway, so I just thought it was just stupid. But then I got interested when my sister Gail, at the end of this particular play, said, "Don't tell Ma that we were playing this game."
Oh.
So I didn't. I kept the secret, but I did tell Father Ziegler when I went to make my first confession. So it was like, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 0 weeks since my last confession. Here are my sins. I told 3 lies, and I called my sister Vita a big pig, and I played Kingy Boy." And Father Ziegler said, "Well, all right, I want you to say two Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys, and wait a minute, you played what?" So when you grow up, when you have a childhood like this, you can be warped enough to write She's Come Undone and this latest novel.
Well, and also, you tend to specialize in characters that both Annie and Dolores are survivors, too. Mm-hmm. They're not just charismatic and troubled, but they've both just been through, hellish ordeals. And in the case of Annie, tell us what your inspiration was for that character, because that's an interesting story about what had happened in the town with the flood.
Oh, yeah, sure. As I mentioned, I grew up in this eastern Connecticut town, and when you say Connecticut, people sort of have this stereotype of these leafy bedroom towns close to New York, where people go to the country club and send their kids to prep school and stuff, and that is so not my Connecticut. Eastern Connecticut is more working class, we gravitate more toward Boston than New York, where I like to say we're more liverwurst than pate. And so in this eastern Connecticut town where I was growing up, when I was 12 years old, there was a devastating flood that happened. I remember the night vividly. It was March 6th, 1963. And a dam, an earthen dam at the northern part of the town collapsed after 2 or 3 days of icy cold rain. And it unleashed about 6 million gallons of water that rushed down and destroyed pretty much the downtown area, the shopping area, and took 5 lives. One of those lives was a young mother. She was about 25, I think, 26, and she and her husband, they were both virtually kids themselves, but they had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an infant, and they made the fateful mistake of trying to outrun the water. So, with a 19-year-old neighbor upstairs, they had heard, just before the water came that it was coming, and so they get the kids into the car, and they're trying to outrun the water, and all of a sudden they're hit from the back with this wall of water. I can still, because I was an eyewitness, the flood came about 6 or 7 houses down from where we lived, and I remember and can still hear the roaring of that water. I can still see these trees and refrigerator-sized blocks of ice and all this debris come shooting by in this rapid water. But in the days that followed, I was captivated by this story of 3 little boys, those 3 whose mother died, who were rescued from a tree their father and the next door neighbor, the upstairs neighbor, got out of the car, as did the mother, and the guys climbed into the tree, and the mother was handing the boys up, and just when she got the last of the three up to the men, the water came and took her away. Now, because I write fiction, not nonfiction, I begin to change this sort of template, I guess I would say. And so I make one of those little boys a little girl, Annie, and she loses her mother in a flood, and her father, he's so grief-stricken
Disintegrates,
that
yeah.
he begins to drink, and so she's pretty much orphaned.
It makes total sense when you read about the calamities that befall Annie to understand why, in the course of the book, she goes through what she goes through, and how getting married is just sort of the key in the lock that sort of sets these things in motion. But certainly, at first, as you're reading about Annie, and some of the things she's done, from not being a particularly warm and tender mother to just sort of her tantrums and rages, and you think, she's not a very likable character, is she? And then you hear about the tragedies and her sexual abuse and everything else, and to where you come around to really kind of root for her to succeed, and get through this. But, while I'm on the subject and waxing about Annie, there's been a lot written about the rigors as a writer of writing unlikable characters. And, you might even object to that very term, because what character in a novel that's any kind of good novel is without flaws? But, and of course, one of the dramatic requirements of good fiction is to kind of hold the character down as long as you can and give them so many things to deal with until they can, come through it. But it's a fine line. I mean, there are moments, and She's Come Undone as well, where you're thinking, I don't know if I can keep reading this. This is so painful, and she's really becoming an awful person before you kind of allow them to kind of get through it and redeem themselves. So that's a long-winded question of saying, how hard is it to find that fine line between wanting to draw characters that are complex and maybe not agreeable, but yet not worried that they're going to turn people off, I guess?
Well, Jane, that question presupposes a strategy. And in my case, I don't have one. I just find a voice and let that voice speak, and that voice and that character, who I get to know on deeper and deeper levels, sort of guides me through the story. I'm envious of the kind of writers who have it all mapped out, outlined, and are writing toward a preconceived ending. Doesn't work that way for me.
That's pretty amazing.
I have to, in my work day, I have to slip out of my own skin and put on somebody else's skin and live as that person. And it expands me. When I was writing She's Come Undone, I learned a whole lot about women that I hadn't known. And when I was writing in my second novel about the identical twins, I know this much is true, I learned a lot about schizophrenia and being your brother's keeper and so forth. I never had a brother. I always wanted one, and so I create this brotherhood, and then, but I don't, I'm not, when I write a novel, I'm not the master puppeteer.
Interesting.
I'm more the puppet.
So there's never a moment where you stop and think, oh, gosh, I really should create it so that Annie is softening her edges right about now. You just get inside them and just ride it through.
Yeah, and I had two wonderful rides on the Oprah Winfrey roller coaster. And then suddenly the rides were over, and I had to write book number 3. And I had forgotten something that a wonderful teacher of mine, Gladys Swan, told me right at the start. I came to writing fiction, sort of later than a lot of the writers that I know. I was about 30, and so when I was about 31, 32, when I started working with this wonderful teacher, and she said. She asked me why I was writing fiction, and I said, well, I teach high school kids, and every year when we read To Kill a Mockingbird, after about the first chapter, they read it because they want to, not because they have to. And so I would like to write a book that young people would read voluntarily. Well, I mean, that was a very impromptu answer. I thought it was pretty good, but Gladys made a face, and she said, and I can do her imitation too. She said, well, my dear, the first thing that you have to realize is that you're not writing for an audience. You're writing for yourself. You tell your own truths, and you have faith that the audience that's meant to find them is gonna find your work. And I had, after the 2 Oprah book selections, I had kind of forgotten that. And suddenly I have these millions of readers, and I'm afraid to write the first sentence of book number 3. And I struggled with that for quite a while, actually. And I had to sort of relearn that lesson and chase everybody else's expectations out of the room and just discover, this next character. So I don't worry about who's gonna, find the character offensive or not.
But how do you do that? How do you chase those expectations out of the room, especially after you've ridden the roller coaster 2 times?
I literally opened the door of my office and imagined people leaving so that I could be alone with these people who had just started telling me this story. Because otherwise, I kept spinning my wheels and thinking I had it, and then, the next day it would seem bogus. It would seem, just not. I didn't feel comfortable, and so I would throw that out and start again, and so forth.
Interesting. Could you backtrack a little and just thrill us with what it's like to hear from Oprah for the first time?
Well, the first time I heard from Oprah, there was no Oprah Book Club. She's Come Undone was released on 4th of July weekend in 1992. And shortly after that, one of my kids, who I think was about maybe 10 or 11 at the time, our oldest son, Jared, not too famous for his telephone manners back then, the phone rings, and he says, hello, yeah, Dad. And so I come to the phone, and this woman on the other end says, is this Wally? And I said, yeah. And she says, what are you doing, Wally? And I said, I'm doing laundry. And she laughed. And I said, well, who is this? And she says, this is Oprah Winfrey. And I came this close to saying, yeah, right, you're Oprah Winfrey and I'm Geraldo Rivera, But thank God I didn't say it, because it was just too damn good an imitation to not. So it was a wonderful little call. She told me I owed her 2 nights' sleep, and also
because she couldn't stop reading.
Because she couldn't stop reading it.
Oh,
but also
great.
she said, she said reading saved my life when I was a kid, and I still read, avidly. And she said when I find a book that I like, I try to track down the author and just say thanks for having written it. So it was this cool call. It didn't have anything to do with the show. It was just such a nice memory. And then, of course, 5 years later, she has this book club. Well, I didn't have any fantasies that she was going to remember my little book. But lo and behold, she called again. The first thing she said was, hey, Wally, you still doing the laundry?
Aww.
And my wife is so mad whenever I tell that story, because if she were here, she would tell you,
never do
I have done the laundry like 4 times in a 35-year marriage.
It just seemed like a good thing to say at the time. Wasn't there a story about how you were doing an interview? You had to call her back or something, and you were.
Oh yeah, Yeah.
Nobody tells Oprah, I'll call you back, I'm busy.
Right. Well, I did. That's what I had to do. I was, having gone through the whole Oprah thing the first time when she chose my second novel a year later, and it was just coming out, and I was in New York doing media stuff. And I was in my room talking to, I think it was the Book of the Month Club journalist, and in the hotel. And Oprah called right in the middle of that interview, and she loves to surprise people. So she said, "Wally, guess what? You're going to be my, our summer book club pick. Yay!" And I'm like, "Oh, isn't that great, ma'am?" But I'm in the middle of an interview because I knew that, you had to be sworn to secrecy about this. So I said, "Could you call me back in 10 minutes?" And she laughed, and she said, "Oh, I'll call you back in, I'll give you 15 minutes. So the interview ended. I walked the reporter out to the elevators and, said goodbye, thanks. And then I go running down the hallway only to realize that I had locked myself out of my room.
Oh, no.
So I'm running down the stairs, crazy, coming back. And then I sat by that phone on the bed in that hotel room for an hour. And after about an hour, I said to myself, if she never calls back, I'm just not telling the publisher. But then she did call back. So.
And what does that mean when you're picked? I mean, in very real terms, it means they have to do an additional press run, or what? Because what does that translate to in terms of sales? Do you have any idea?
Well, I tell you, when She's Come Undone was picked, it was sort of the best and the worst of that life can offer you happening at the same day. What had happened was that the day before, a beloved student of mine, really talented creative writer, she was a senior in high school, and she and her younger brother had been killed by a drunk driver. And it was just a horrible, horrible situation. It was their parents, they were their parents' only two children. And the family is Jewish, so the burial happened to be had to be happening within 24 hours. So I had just it was a very hard day at the high school. The kids were crying, I was crying, we were all sort of holding each other, and then we went to the synagogue and had for the service, and then I got home. And I hadn't even taken my coat off yet. It was winter, it was January, and Oprah called with the news. And it was like, it was too much to take in. And I explained to her, she was very sweet about it. And then she put on her producer and she said, "Well, Wally, you have to get a hold of your publisher tonight." Now at this point it was Friday, it was after hours. I said, "I don't think I could do that." I said, "Everybody's gone home." And she said, "Well, give it a shot." And because if this thing goes the way it's going, they have to start printing this weekend. I think it was going to be 2 weeks before the announcement what happened. So at about 10 o'clock, somebody called me back, and as they told me later, they had a big meeting on Saturday morning. Everybody came in and they ordered pulp and a huge print run, and so it was. She's Come Undone sold in the millions after that, and it's still chugging along.
Yeah.
So.
I actually listened to, on that long road trip that we were talking about, I listened to it on tape, or they don't call it books on tape anymore. What is it? Whatever. Audio, CDs. And Kathy Najimy just did a brilliant job.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
She was my pick, actually.
Was she?
And she was interested in, it was, She's Come Undone was sold to the movies. It's never been made. But Kathy Najimy was very, she would have been age appropriate at the time to play Dolores, and she had the weight thing, and so I got to know her a little bit, and I suggested her for that role, and good old Kathy, she comes in. She had just given birth, and she was still nursing her baby, and so she did it anyway. She came into the studio and recorded that. I think she did a great job
She
too.
did an amazing job. It
Yeah.
was perfect, really. As long as we're on the topic of Hollywood, I bet every single one, I didn't even ask you this earlier, but I bet every one of your books has probably been optioned for something.
She's Come Undone was optioned twice and then sold. And I know this much is true, was sold right out of the starting gate. The Hour I First Believed, not. Wishing and Hoping, my little funny book, not. Although there's been some inquiry lately, and We Are Water is being, as they say in Hollywood, shopped around.
Shopped around.
Right now. So we'll see.
It's just interesting, and as we were talking earlier, and my own little memoir came out in 2007, was sold for a TV show, and it's always astonishing for those of us who are not used to Hollywood to see the level of excitement over a project, and this is going to be amazing, and then it just dies.
Yeah.
It absolutely dies a very quick and slow and quiet death.
Yeah. The red flag is when Hollywood tells you they are passionate to do this. Whenever you hear the word passionate, you sort of back off. I mean, She's Come Undone was like wonderful director, Swedish director named Lasse Hallström.
Oh, I love Lasse Hallström.
Oh,
yeah.
me too. And I worked with him a little bit as a consultant, and he was attached to the film or the development of the film.
He would have been
And
perfect.
then he sort of, drifted away. Reese Witherspoon, I met with her 2 or 3 times, and she's about this tall and weighs about, I don't know, 3 pounds or something.
Right.
So she said, very earnestly, she wanted to play the Dolores part, and she wanted to produce the movie and stuff, and then, that didn't happen. Zach Braff, who was in that, what was that show? He was in the
Scrubs.
Scrubs, yeah.
But he also did that wonderful movie Garden State,
Right.
which was brilliant. Yeah.
And Garden State was just about to come out, and so he invited me down to New York, and I sat in a private screening room and watched this, and I loved that movie.
Great movie.
So I was very excited. He was going to direct, and then he was also going to rewrite the screenplay. But to Zach Braff's credit, he's the only one in all this experience that I've had who called back to say, I'm not going to do it after all. I'm doing this other project. Everybody else just tells you how passionate it is, and then you just never hear from them anymore.
I know. I want to talk a little about your teaching. Many people don't know that you were a high school teacher of English for many years. When did you stop doing that? Was it when you finally started writing full time? When was that?
Yeah, I graduated from the University of Connecticut in 1972 and did a U-turn, went right back to the high school that I had graduated from in my hometown. And I taught there for 25 years and had a couple of leaves of absence. I had a grant from the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, and so I used that to take a semester off, and I was writing She's Come Undone then. And I left that job, I think it was about 1996, 97, and I thought incorrectly that a college teaching job was going to be an easier balance for somebody who was also trying to write fiction. So I taught at the University of Connecticut, also my alma mater, for a couple of years. I ran their creative writing department. And then, I just couldn't get my other work done. So the day that I was leaving that position, I had my office packed up, and I had the key in my hand to bring down, hand in to the office secretary. The phone rang, and it was a woman named Margie Cohen, who was somebody I played with when I was a kid. She did not throw rocks at me.
I was going to say.
And she said, we're in trouble here down at the prison. She was the librarian at York Prison, and she said, could you come down? She said, there have been a couple of suicides, there have been 3 more attempts, and we're just trying to distract the women. So the school staff was calling everybody they knew to come and talk about their work. I didn't want to do it, and I procrastinated, but I did say, I promised that I would go down. So eventually I did, and that was August of 1999. I thought I was going for one 90-minute session, and now, it's over 14 years later, I'm still going there.
Well, you just answered my unasked next question, which was how you got involved in that. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, well, the governor of Connecticut back then was John Rowland, who had gotten elected on a tough on crime platform. And he was, once he was the governor of the state, we weren't going to have prisons like Club Meds, which,
Oh,
they
yeah,
hardly
like they're all
were.
like that,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And so, so that was, he paramilitarized the guards, and he cut back psychiatric services and so forth, and the women were having bad reactions. Many of them had been, or suffered from PTSD, and suddenly these sort of, these male sort of, uniformed guys with dogs and billy clubs were sort of walking around, and it was just horrible. So anyway, I went there. I did a 40-minute program, a 90-minute program for 40 women, and I was packing up at the end, and I had talked about my writing. I said, does anybody have any questions about writing? And these were the questions about writing. Yes? You met Oprah? And so the woman, the scariest looking woman who had, the whole time had been watching me like this, I was sort of surprised when she raised her hand at the end and she said, "Thanks for coming." And I said, "You're welcome." And she said, "Are you coming back?" And I think it's just because I'm such a chicken that I was afraid she was going to hurt me. I said, "Okay, I'll come back in 2 weeks, write something, anything, and we'll have a workshop, and your writing is your ticket back in." So we went from 40 people to about 12 people, but those 12 people kept wanting me to come back, and they wanted to learn. And it's really been the most exciting teaching that I've done in all my career.
And out of that teaching came 2 different anthologies.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find a publisher for 2 anthologies from women convicts, basically?
Well, I was taking the train in to New York to talk to my publisher about the novel that I was writing. And in my briefcase, working on the train, was the women's work. And so my publisher, Judith Regan, I'm having a meeting, and she said, "So what's new with you?" And I said, "Oh, well," and I told her about how excited I was to be working with this program. And she just said, to be polite, I think, "Oh, I'll have to read their work sometime." I said, "Well, I take it out of my bag." And Judith is not a crier by any means, but I read just a random piece of work from one of the students, and I looked up when I was finished, and she was in tears, and she said, she's got a kind of a foul mouth, excuse me, but she said, "This is fucking better than half of the stuff from professionals that I read." And so she wanted to publish it.
That's great. That's a great story. And yet, we had some drama with, it was Couldn't Keep It to Myself. That was the first anthology.
Yes.
That was the most extraordinary story to read about, and it's kind of lengthy, so just to sum it up, basically, after the anthology comes out, there's a lawsuit against the women prisoners who contributed to it by the state of Connecticut, saying that because they were profiting from this, they actually owed the state of Connecticut all the money that it cost them to incarcerate them.
Right.
So they got bills for like $150,000.
$917,000 was the top one, yeah, for a woman who was convicted in a racist trial. They charged them $117 a day, like the Holiday
Club
Inn
Med,
or something.
yeah.
Yeah. But the irony is, when I nominated one of the women for the First Amendment Award that the Penn American Center gives out, and she won the award. What she won was $25,000 from Paul Newman's own company. Well, that's when the shit really hit the fan. And so they told me at the prison that I was no longer welcome. They were investigating me. And then the cruelest thing that they did was they confiscated the women's floppy disks. I mean, you should see the old equipment that we use there. No internet whatsoever. But then they deleted 5 years worth of their writing from the hard drives of these rickety old computers. So I notified Penn. Penn notified 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes investigated, and the Department of Correction lied to 60 Minutes. You know what happens when 60 Minutes gets lied to? So the story aired. The state of Connecticut did a backflip, and suddenly this is a wonderful program,
Right.
and it all ended okay. But it was very weird and Kafkaesque. Now I have a PS to that, and that is, in September of this year, the Department of Correction banned She's Come Undone.
What?
The Connecticut Department of Correction, they said it was too sexually explicit for their lovely little,
Their tender
flowers.
ladies.
Yeah. So I got
my
on
goodness.
my social media stuff, and I said this was happening, and there were hundreds of outraged responses, and so again another backflip, and within 24 hours they unbanned the book.
It was back on the shelf. You actually, I understand you took to wearing a T-shirt for a while that said "Read banned books" or something like that.
Yeah, and I wore it at the prison too. The next class, yeah. I never meant to be an activist. As I said, I'm kind of chicken about stuff, but just some of the outrageous stuff
That's
happens.
pretty egregious.
When you go down there and you see it, and you hear it in the stories that the women tell, and in the writing, you can't unsee it, you can't unhear it, and so you get mad enough to fight.
In the course of my 14 years doing Litquake, I've heard a lot of authors talk about their hatred of social media and the fact that nowadays it's not enough to be a really good writer who writes a really good book. You also have to be adept at Twitter and Facebook and other things, and your notify list, and your this and your that, and your blog, and but when I hear stories like this, I think, well, that's a good reason to kind of stay in touch with your fans and let them know kind of on a daily basis. In fact, I looked at your Facebook today. They said you were enjoying San Francisco, and I thought, well, it's a good thing. It's not always a bad thing. It's just a tedious thing.
I resisted Facebook for a long time, and then once my agent told me, "Oh, you're getting to be a dinosaur. Everybody does Facebook," and so I got, I started up, and then I began to love it a little too much because it's a great procrastination strategy.
Yes, it is.
However, I began to get the hang of it. Not only as a promotional tool, but as a tool to reconnect with people I had known in high school and lost track of, my students from the high school. It always kind of freaks me out when these kids that I knew when they were 16, 17, now I'm reconnected with them in their middle age. How old must I be, I'm still trying to figure out Twitter. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not using it the right way. I don't think.
I don't know what the right way is.
I don't either, obviously.
I'd like to hear a little about your writing process in the sense of, we've already talked about how you don't sort of start out with an outline for a novel, but you kind of inhabit these characters, you listen to them, listen to their story, just kind of put their storyline together as it comes through you. And I've heard a number of authors sort of say this. This is kind of their muse speaking or whatever, and we don't want to get too woo-woo, even though this is Northern California. But that is, you've described that as sort of a gift that you feel like when you kind of quiet, it's almost like meditation when you sort of quiet your mind that these things come into it.
Well, I have a quote on my bulletin board by the great writer and writing teacher, John Gardner. And this is going to be a bad paraphrase because it's a longer quote. I can't remember the whole thing. But he says something about when you're writing a novel, sometimes, not always, not a lot, but sometimes the the Frankenstein monster is in front of you, and you have sort of patched it all together, and then suddenly the lightning strikes, and something magical happens, or something that you didn't imagine would happen. And what he's talking about, another way of saying that is you get in the zone, so to speak. And when that happens, it doesn't happen to me very often, but when it does, it's really exciting because the story is more alive than your real life around you. So, the calendar, on the wall blurs, and, the deer who are outside eating your wife's flowers, in the garden, they kind of fade away, and you are alive in the story. And Gardner says, what I can't, he says about his own writing, when those moments happen, what I can't explain is where the lightning comes from. And that's true of me too. I don't know why this happens. I don't know if it's a matter of brain chemistry, or just something happens, and you are living the story rather than writing the story. And so your hands are sort of like, your fingers are flying on the keyboard, or you're going like this with your legal pad and your Bic pen. I wish it happened more, because it wouldn't take me 6 or 9 years to write a novel. But those are the days where it feels like a gift, and I just don't know who the gift giver is or what the gift giver is.
It's magic, God, whatever. I'm also curious about what your writing day is like. You had a hilarious quote at one thing that I read where you said, if I'm having a really bad writing day, I knock off at 1 p.m. and watch Days of Our Lives. Which is kind of hard. And I thought, that's where you get the inspiration for these pot boilers that you write, all the high drama.
Yeah, I was doing an event with Liz Gilbert, who's she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and then she has a new novel out now. And we were on the stage, and I think that's where I said that. And she said to me, in front of this audience of people, she said, Wally, I just fell in love with you. Because apparently she's a Days of Our Lives fan too. But as far as my work day, if I can get physical exercise in, I'm an early riser, so it doesn't, it's easy for me to get up early.
What do you do when there's snow on the ground in Connecticut?
I get up early and then go out and shovel.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. But on days when it's not snowy, at 6 o'clock or 6:15, faithfully, my good friend Ethel shows up, and she is so damn faithful. It's like she never takes a day off. She and I go to the gym together first thing in the morning. And so she's out there in the driveway. Otherwise, I probably would be sleeping in bed. But I go out there, and we go to the gym and do the exercise machines for about an hour. And then I come back, and I'll have a quick something to eat. And if I can get started by 8:30 in the morning, that's a good day for me. And those are my most productive hours up until about maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, with time out for a lot of snacks. And then I don't know why, but my creative brain just sort of shuts off after that. Now I have an office. I'm writing now that we are empty nesters, my wife and me. I'm writing at home, but then I go into my office in the afternoon and meet with, I have a part-time assistant who is a grad student at UConn, and so he and I will be working, like the business end of things. So, but my day ends at about 6 o'clock.
Do you write every day or 5 days a week, or?
I don't usually write on Sundays, but sometimes I do. And other than that, I'm pretty much at it.
I think I'll ask you one more question, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience. So be thinking of some pithy thing that you'd like to ask. Do you have, what advice you've had a lot of young and aspiring writers around you for decades now. And, what advice do you give them if they say, oh, I really want to be a writer, other than don't give up your day job?
Well, I think you have to humble yourself to the process, or it is going to humble you. I think you need to write just about every day. When I was teaching at UConn, my students would come in and get whiny, which, I get whiny too, but they would go, oh, I'm so busy, and, there's never any time to write. And I would say, well, get up earlier. That's what I did, set your alarm for 4:30. And then they would look at me like I was a Martian or something. But then we had an interesting discussion once where they said that they get a lot of their writing done late at night when the dorm quiets down. And so I think probably as long as you can find some time when you're the only one on the watch, whether it's early morning or late at night, doesn't matter. It depends on your clock. But I think you have to find alone time. I think you have to humble yourself to the process. I think you have to dispel bestseller fantasies, and I would say find other people that you can join with in a group and give each other feedback. That certainly has been my process right from the start, and to this day. I work in 2 writers groups, plus I run the writing workshop at the prison. I'm happy to take feedback from them about work in progress, as well as give feedback. And I think if you can prescribe for other writers, you can take what your observations are and bring it back. I like to demystify what revision is. I think it's some combination of these strategies. What can I add to make it better? What can I cut out that's going to make it stronger? What do I need to clarify? And how about if I put this thing here instead of here? So I call that reordering. And different pieces of writing need different, sort of combinations of some of that.
Sometimes it's just that simple.
Mm-hmm.
I teach personal essay, which is like a minute segment of that, but it's always like, if this sentence doesn't propel the thing forward, cut it.
Right.
Sometimes it's just that simple.
Right.
So is now a good time to take questions from the audience? I guess we'll run around with the microphone. There he is, over there. Voice of God.
Is that the disembodied voice of Ryan?
Yes.
Okay, on your left is the first question.
How do your voices for your characters leave you once you've committed them to the page?
How did they leave me when I finish a novel? Well, let me think about that. I take them to the point where I'm not worried about them anymore, because I know that either they've come out okay or not. I know the outcome. When I write in first person, and I'll never say never, but I don't imagine that I'm ever going to write a third-person objective novel. And so when I become these people, the I is that character, and yet I'm feeling very parental toward them. And because I don't know if they're going to be okay or not, I worry my way through the novel. And lots of times I get surprised by the things they say. Lots of times I feel disapproval about the things that they're doing, but I give them free rein to be who they seem to want to be. And then when I'm done, I hate to sound unsympathetic toward these characters that I love for years, but I'm done, And what's hard for me is starting with new characters that I don't know at all, and I have to begin again. When I finished my first novel, I thought, okay, I must know how to do it, And but I quickly learned that I only knew how to do it for that novel, and then you have to relearn, again and again.
I would appreciate any suggestions you would have as to how to go from technical writing to creative writing, how one can transition
Oh, there you
from
are.
one to the other.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that I can help with that question because I'm not a technical writer. I think maybe Jane is your person to answer that question because whenever I start something, I'll sometimes start with nonfiction. But I almost always instinctively start lying about it. My third novel, The Hour I First Believed, was about, it starts with the Columbine story. And so I guess that's the closest I've ever come to a kind of technical writing because I did lots and lots of research. I got so deeply into the research that I ended up, with a pretty bad case of depression about it. But then I began to create these characters who were, they were affected by Columbine, but they were not real people. They were fictional people. Jane, how would you?
I would say I teach at the Writers Grotto. I don't know if you know what that is. It's the collective of writers in South of Market area. There's about 30 writers all sharing a space, and they offer classes. Authors like, nonfiction, Poe Bronson is one of them, and go to just Google Writers Grotto classes, and they have everything from memoir to personal essay, which is what I teach, and just the nice thing about those writing classes is that it's not a huge commitment like applying to SF State or something. It's just, you could do like a one-day workshop on the weekend, just kind of stick a toe in and see if it's something that you feel like you can wrap your mind around. But we do get people who've done nothing but technical writing and really want to elbow their way out of that and into something a little more expansive.
There are a couple of books that you might want to take a look at. Maybe you know them already. One is by Anne Lamott, and it's a book about, she says it's a book about writing and life. It's called Bird by Bird. And the other one that was helpful to me at one point when I hit a dry spell was, I think it's called The Artist's Way.
It's a wonderful book.
Julia Cameron, right?
I forgot the name,
Yeah,
but
I think that's who it is. I think she might have been. Was she one of Salman Rushdie's wives? I think she might have been. Yeah, he's had a number of them. But that book has like exercises and so forth, and that may be a nice springboard. Are you a technical writer? Yeah. Try taking a look at those two, and it's sort of, it might prime the pump for you. Good luck.
Question on the left here.
Hi, Wally. I'm a great fan of your work, and I grew up in Connecticut also with two bossy older sisters who still tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, in your novel, The Hour I First Believed, which is, I think, at this point so far, my favorite, I was curious about your process with the Columbine shooting. Did you actually interview the families, and what was that process like for you?
I didn't interview the families. And by the way, maybe we should have a younger brothers of older sisters therapy group.
Support group for bullied
anyway,
brothers.
No, that was the first book that was really very internet research driven for me. I got online and I printed out article after article after article. I read books about it, and again, I got so deeply into it that I went to a psychologist because I was getting very depressed with it, and he said, I think you have what's an occupational hazard for psychologists sometimes. He called it vicarious traumatization, and so I had to work my way through that. But I did finally meet some people who were involved with Columbine. There was a I think it might have been the Denver Post or the Rocky Mountain News. When that book came out, a reporter was interviewing me, and she said, I know you were out here, but I can't find anybody who knew you or met you while you were here. She said, did you live in Cherry Hills section? I said, no. I said, I've never been to Littleton, but I got it all from all these accounts. It was so well covered. Anyway, the book is published, and I'm on a book tour. Starts out in New York, and I'm going progressively west. And I'm really getting nervous about appearing in the Denver area at one of the tattered cover stores. And because I didn't know how people were going to feel about my fictionalizing around a very painful real-life event. So I appeared that night. It was a big crowd, and it went very well. I read, the Q&A was, very validating. People said that, they appreciated that I was investigating this and so forth. And then I had a signing afterwards, and big long line, and I was about maybe 50, 60 people into the signing line, and this guy puts his book in front of me, sort of a nondescript middle-aged guy, and he said, do you think Eric's brother Kevin should read this book? And I'm not getting it, and all of a sudden, woo, I did get it. It was the father of Eric Harris, one of the shooters, standing in front of me. And the reason why he had asked that question is because I had mentioned that all the time I was writing that book, and that took me about 9 years to write, I was worried about the two older brothers of those two younger kids who had done this horrible, horrible thing. And I've written this very long, maybe overly long book, and suddenly I'm speechless with Wayne Harris standing in front of me. And so I didn't know what to do. I put my hands out, and he grabbed onto my hands, and we just squeezed each other's hands. And I said to him, I don't have any answers for you. And he said, I don't have any answers for you either. And it was such a powerful and sad moment. I'll never forget that moment. I gave him my email. He emailed me back a couple of times. Nothing, very dramatic or anything happened in those exchanges, but, I felt his pain, and I'm sure he just, the families involved. I mean, of course, the victims' families, your hearts go out to them, but my heart goes out to those parents too, because I just can't imagine what it would be like to be having to get up every day and know that your kid did something this horrible. I can really bring the party down, can't I?
Anybody have a
Okay,
cheerful
let's hope the next question's on
question?
the light side. You had one right here? Oh, you have one right here in the front.
Hi, Wally. I really admire the writing program that you do at the Women's Correctional Institute in
Thank you.
Connecticut. And I'm really curious to know if any of those women have directly or indirectly influenced your writing, or any specific or non-specific characters in any of your past, present, or future plans that you have for writing.
Well, they certainly have influenced the writing. With The Hour I First Believed, my character, one of my main characters, suffers. She is at Columbine. She's a school nurse, and she's there in the library that day, and then she develops second stage post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, I had been on the receiving end of lots and lots of writing by the women at the prison about post-traumatic stress disorder, largely from their childhood horrors such as incest, but in other cases, women who had married abusers or had partnered up with abusers and so forth. And so they gave me an education about how, when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, how it sort of shapes and warps your life. With the new book, with We Are Water, of course, many of the women have written about trusted me and trusted one another eventually with the very painful, incidences of sexual abuse by pedophiles, and many of whom were in their families, and that plays itself out in the story. Now, on a lighter note, one of my students, when I was writing my funny book, Wishin' and Hopin', one day she said we were talking about parochial school, and so she said, "Oh yeah," she said, "I went to parochial school," and she started telling me in the class about this one girl who came over from Russia, and she said the only thing I remember about her is that she used to groom her hair with mayonnaise, and so I took that and ran with it, and I created a character named Zhenya Kobakova, and she is Russian student who comes over to parochial school, and she is older than the other girls, and she has begun to develop as a woman, and the nuns are sort of horrified, and I had such a good time writing that character and writing that book. I laughed my way all the way through it, and I had just finished the Columbine book, so I think it was sort of my comic relief book, and I had to remind myself that you can walk on the sunny side of the street as well. But yeah, so that was a more direct character who resulted from a conversation that we had one day in class. Yeah.
We have time for a few more questions here.
When I read She's Come Undone, I was convinced that the author was a female. And I know you said you grew up with a lot of women around you, but what else did you pull from, and who else did you pull from to so eloquently capture the female spirit and the female voice?
As I mentioned, I'm active in writers groups, and the women in those groups were never shy about speaking up when I hit false notes, and I hit plenty of them when I was writing as Dolores, and they said, "Oh no, a woman would never do that," and so I was able to, you're reading draft 14 or something, and so I was able to sand off a lot of the rough edges. I did, as I mentioned, I learned a lot about women that I hadn't known in the process of writing that. But I've always liked women and girls. I've always felt comfortable with them, and because I taught high school all those years, and when I started writing myself, I threw out everything I thought I knew about how to teach writing, and I began, instead of assigning topics, to invite the students to write about, what they wanted or needed to write about. And of course, adolescents are very, self-absorbed, and so usually what they wanted to write about was themselves. And so suddenly now I'm on the receiving end of all these teenage voices, half of which were female. And so that, I didn't take anybody's story, or I didn't base Dolores on any of my actual students, but I think that sort of bled its way into the creation of her. So I don't know. I don't mean to sound too glib, but if men are from Mars and women are from Venus, I guess you could call me an intergalactic traveler.
I think we have time for one more question over here. Come on over. Great.
Hi, Mr. Lamb. I don't
Hey.
really have a question. I just want to say I am so thankful that I had you as my English teacher at NFA.
Oh.
And it's 20 years later. It's really surreal to sit here in San Francisco and listen to you. But thank
Tell
you.
me, wait a minute, I can't see you, so tell me your name.
It's Gabby Bowden.
Oh my gosh, Gabby, yes, I remember you very well.
I even brought my yearbook for you.
Oh my gosh, that was back when I had some hair on my head, right? Yeah, yeah. Well, good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you.
Yeah, thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
You know who else is in the audience tonight? I have no idea where, but my friend Ethel, who shows up at 6:15. She and her wife Penny are here They just happened to come out to San Francisco at the same time that my book tour landed here. Where are you, Ethel? Oh, there she is, right in the front. That cute little white-haired lady. Ethel and I have been friends for 40-something years, and when she and her partner Penny got married, I was their best man. So yeah.
In fact, I remembered reading that you said you based We Are Water around a lesbian wedding because you had been so touched by being the best man at lesbian wedding, and they're here. Isn't that nice?
And there they are.
There they are.
Penny's going to kill me. She doesn't like to be. So yeah.
Well, I think on that note, on that happy note, we're going to conclude
please.
tonight's program. And Jane Ganahl, Wally Lamb, thank you so much. Thank you, audience. Please join us for reception and book signing in the atrium.